Zeldar stood alone on the observation deck of the Kalvar Citadel, his silhouette framed by the cold, unfeeling expanse of the void. The endless stretch of stars shimmered like distant, indifferent gods. His scales, once vibrant with the deep greens of his youth, had faded to a muted gray. Each ridge along his brow bore the subtle cracks of time, and his right arm, a mechanical construct of alloy and nerve link, twitched faintly as if remembering battles long past. The council chamber behind him buzzed with the murmurs of the assembled Dravik elite. Their voices, sharp and commanding, interwove in a cacophony of confidence and dismissiveness. They debated terms, strategies, and probabilities with a detachment that bordered on arrogance. Zeldar's presence had been requested, but his words carried the weight of an ancient relic, a thing acknowledged but ignored. He had long stopped arguing, content now to let silence hold the truths they refused to hear. The council leader, Yevrkar, swept into the room, her robes trailing like liquid fire. Her golden scales glistened under the chamber's pale light. She exuded authority and grace. But to Zeldar, she was yet another symbol of the naivety that plagued his people. She took her place at the central podium, raising a hand to quiet the room. Our emissaries report positive advancements in negotiations with the humans. She began, her tone calm and measured. They have proposed terms of cooperation that will strengthen our position in the galaxy. Zeldar felt his claws tighten around the railing. He turned slowly, his deep, gravelly voice cutting through the room's fragile optimism. You speak of cooperation as if it is an end. It is a tactic, one they wield better than any weapon. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber, but Yevrkar met his gaze with unwavering resolve. Your experiences, War Master, are relics of another time. The humans we face now are not the scavengers of the fringe you once fought. They seek progress, not destruction. They seek advantage, Zeldar countered, stepping forward. His mechanical arm clicked softly as he gestured toward the holographic display of Earth, its blue and green surface serene and deceptive. Do not mistake their smiles for submission. They have learned, adapted. What you see as progress is preparation. Another voice rose, this one sharper, belonging to Zyrak Nal, the youngest member of the council and one of Zeldar's most vocal critics. And what would you have us do, old soldier? Refuse their overtures and retreat to isolation? The galaxy moves forward. We cannot afford to stagnate. Zeldar's eyes narrowed, the crimson slits of his pupils glinting with barely restrained anger. I would have you think, I would have you see beyond their words, their gestures of goodwill. I have fought them, seen their minds at work. They are not like us, bound by tradition and hierarchy. They thrive in chaos, and they will turn it upon us. The chamber fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the soft hum of the holographic displays. Yevrkar leaned forward, her tone softening as she addressed him directly. Zeldar, you're a hero of our people. Your victories are written into our history. But history cannot bind the future. We will proceed with caution, but we must proceed. Zeldar's jaw tightened, the taste of futility bitter on his tongue. He looked around the room, at faces that saw him as little more than a relic of a bygone era. They saw his warnings as fear, his wisdom as paranoia. Yet, in the depths of his soul, he knew they were wrong. Caution, he said at last, his voice quieter but no less firm. You say you'll proceed with caution, but caution is not enough. You are inviting predators into your den and hoping they will abide by your rules. Before Yevrkar could respond, a chime echoed through the chamber, signaling the arrival of an emissary. The holographic display shifted to show a human diplomat, his face smooth and unlined, his suit impeccable. He smiled, a gesture that always struck Zeldar as both disarming and predatory. The human's voice carried a practiced warmth as he began outlining new proposals for shared technological advancements and resource pooling. His words were measured, his tone effortlessly diplomatic, but to Zeldar, it was a song of veiled intent. As the council listened intently, Zeldar's gaze lingered on the man's face. There was no malice there, but that made it worse. The humans did not need malice to dismantle their enemies. They needed only opportunity. The session concluded with the council agreeing to review the proposals further. As the chamber emptied, Yevrakar approached Zeldar, her expression soft but resolute. "I value your counsel, old friend," she said quietly. "But fear can cloud even the sharpest mind." Zeldar said nothing, watching her leave before turning back to the observation deck. The void stretched before him, vast and indifferent, just as it always had. He rested his hand on the railing, the cold metal grounding him. They would not listen. He had known that before he spoke, yet he had tried. He had fought for his people his entire life, given them everything he had, and now they saw him as a relic of an age best forgotten. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps he was a relic. But relics had a way of enduring when all else was lost. As the distant stars blinked in and out of the vast blackness, Zeldar's thoughts returned to the humans. He did not fear them because they were strong. He feared them because they were weak. And in their weakness, they had discovered how to turn even their frailties into weapons. If the council would not see it, then he would, alone if necessary. Turning from the void, Zeldar began the long walk to his quarters. His mechanical arm twitched faintly, a ghost of old battles fought. He could feel another storm gathering, one that would test not only the strength of the Dravik, but the very fabric of their pride. And this time, he feared, pride would not be enough. The arrival of the human emissaries was marked by an understated grace that Zeldar found profoundly unsettling. Their vessel, sleek and unadorned, docked at the orbital station without the fanfare typical of diplomatic envoys. The humans emerged in their finely tailored suits, their every movement deliberate, their expressions carefully composed. Zeldar watched from a shadowed alcove as they were greeted by the Dravik delegation. The sight filled him with a sense of foreboding he could not shake. The leader of the human delegation, a man named Elias Vren, exuded an effortless charisma. His voice carried the perfect balance of warmth and authority, each word carefully chosen to disarm suspicion and foster trust. Zeldar had studied humans long enough to recognize the subtle manipulations embedded in their speech. Vren's smile, practiced and precise, felt more like a blade hidden in silk than an expression of goodwill. As the delegation was escorted into the council chambers, Zeldar lingered behind. He had not been invited to the meeting, but that suited him. The humans were not here for him. They were here for the council. He doubted they would even acknowledge his presence unless forced to. He slipped through a side corridor, his mechanical arm humming softly with each step, and positioned himself near an observation node that would allow him to listen in on the proceedings. The humans wasted no time presenting their proposals. Vren spoke of mutual prosperity, of exchanging technologies to benefit both species. His words painted a vision of shared progress, of a brighter future forged together. The council listened intently, their questions polite but probing. Zeldar noted how Vren responded with an almost preternatural ease, deflecting concerns with reassurances that sounded both sincere and hollow. The presentation turned to the matter of defense. Vren proposed a joint initiative to strengthen border regions between their territories, offering to station human advisors on Dravik worlds to aid in security measures. To the untrained ear, it was a magnanimous gesture, but to Zeldar, it reeked of encroachment. The humans were laying groundwork, planting seeds of influence that would take root in the heart of Dravik society. When the council adjourned, Zeldar retreated to his quarters. His mind churned with unease as he reviewed the events of the day. The humans were playing a long game, one the council seemed oblivious to. They saw only the surface of the proposals, the allure of advancement without considering the cost. Zeldar had seen this pattern before, during the early skirmishes with human colonies. They had always been adept at exploiting weaknesses, not through brute force but through subtle manipulation. The following days only deepened his concern. The human advisors, as promised, began to arrive on Dravik worlds. They were strategically placed in positions of influence, their presence justified by their expertise. Reports trickled in of minor changes, harmless at first glance. adjustments to planetary defense protocols, slight modifications to resource allocation. But Zeldar recognized the pattern. The humans were reshaping Dravic infrastructure to their advantage, brick by unnoticed brick. Zeldar sought an audience with Yevrkar, but she dismissed his concerns with a patience that bordered on condescension. "You see shadows where there are none," she said, her tone placating. "These advisors are here to help us. Their recommendations have already improved efficiency across several sectors." "Improved efficiency for now," Zeldar countered. "What happens when they pull the strings they've woven into our systems? By the time you see their intentions, it will be too late to undo the damage." Yevrkar's gaze softened, as though she pitied him. "You carry the weight of old wars, Zeldar. It clouds your perception of the present." The conversation ended there, leaving Zeldar seething with frustration. He retreated to the training grounds, seeking solace in the rhythm of combat drills. His mechanical arm clashed against practice dummies with a force that left deep gouges in the reinforced material. The younger warriors gave him a wide berth, their respect for the old war master tempered by the intensity of his presence. The tipping point came a week later, when a minor incident at a Dravic military outpost sent ripples through the council. A shipment of advanced weaponry had gone missing, the culprits vanishing without a trace. Human advisors stationed at the outpost offered to assist in the investigation, but Zeldar saw the move for what it was, a prelude to deeper infiltration. He confronted Zyraknal, who had been overseeing the integration of the human advisors. The younger Dravic bristled at the accusation, his golden scales flaring with indignation. "You see conspiracies in every shadow, old one," Zyraknal snapped. "The humans have done nothing but aid us. You would tear apart alliances for the sake of your pride." "This isn't about pride," Zeldar growled. "It's about survival. They are not here to help us. They are here to dismantle us from within." Their argument escalated, drawing the attention of nearby officials. Zyraknal's sharp words left Zeldar standing alone once more, the crowd dispersing with murmurs of disapproval. His warnings were falling on deaf ears, and the humans were capitalizing on every moment of hesitation. That evening, Zeldar stood on the observation deck once again, his gaze fixed on the stars. The void stretched endlessly before him, a stark reminder of the battles he had fought, the lives he had taken, and the lessons he had learned. He thought of the humans, their smiling emissaries, their well-placed advisors. He thought of the council, blind to the web being woven around them. In the stillness of the night, a quiet resolve settled over him. He could not stop the tide alone, but he could prepare for it. If no one else would see the danger, then he would bear the burden himself. He would watch, he would learn, and when the time came, he would act. For now, he waited. But waiting was not inaction. Waiting was survival. And survival was something Zeldar knew intimately. The first reports of coordinated human strikes arrived like whispers carried on the wind, barely audible amid the hum of the council's complacency. Minor skirmishes at the outer colonies, resource depots sabotaged, and communication relays mysteriously disabled, all dismissed as unrelated incidents by those who preferred comfort over vigilance. But to Zeldar, the pattern was unmistakable. The humans were not probing for weaknesses. They already knew where to strike. The first real blow came at the Krelvar outpost, a key supply hub at the edge of Dravic-controlled space. The attack was sudden and brutal, a surgical strike that left no survivors and no evidence save for the chilling precision of its execution. By the time reinforcements arrived, the outpost was little more than scorched ruins. Even from the fragmentary reports, Zeldar recognized the handiwork. This was not the clumsy aggression of a fledgling power. It was the calculated efficiency of an enemy who had been studying them for years. He strode into the council chamber uninvited, his mechanical arm whirring faintly with suppressed tension. The assembled leaders turned toward him, their conversations halting as he crossed the room with deliberate strides. Yevrkar, seated at the center of the great crescent table, regarded him with thinly veiled irritation. "What is the meaning of this, War Master?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the silence. Zeldar stopped before the table, his crimson eyes burning with restrained fury. The meaning is that your so-called allies have revealed their true intentions. The attack on Krelvar is not an isolated act of piracy. It is the beginning of their war. Zyraknal scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a sneer. And what proof do you have of this? A handful of destroyed outposts and your endless paranoia. Zeldhar's claws scraped against the polished stone of the table as he leaned forward. Proof? You want proof? Look at the precision of their strikes, the way they dismantle our infrastructure piece by piece. They're not testing us. They're dismantling us. Yevrakar raised a hand to quiet the room, her gaze sharp and unwavering. Even if this is the work of humans, it does not mean open war. We must not escalate without certainty. Certainty? Zeldhar growled, his voice rising. By the time you have your certainty, it will be too late. They're already among us, entwined in our systems, learning our vulnerabilities. You think this is about resources or territory? No, this is about control. The council murmured uneasily, but Yevrakar held her ground. We will investigate further before making any decisions. Rash actions could lead to needless devastation. Zeldhar stepped back, his mechanical fingers clenching into a fist. Devastation is already upon us. But do as you will. When their ships darken our skies, remember this moment. Without waiting for a response, he turned and left the chamber. The futility of his words hung heavy in his chest, but he had neither the time nor patience for further arguments. The humans would not wait, and neither could he. In the days that followed, the scale of the human assault became undeniable. Coordinated strikes dismantled key logistical hubs and disrupted supply lines, leaving the Dravik military scrambling to respond. What infuriated Zeldhar most was the elegance of the attacks. They were not brute force invasions, but carefully calculated maneuvers designed to cripple without overextending. The humans were playing a game of attrition, forcing the Dravik to expend resources and morale with every skirmish. Against his better judgment, the council eventually summoned him to lead a counteroffensive. Their desperation was palpable, and though Zeldhar took no pleasure in their regret, he accepted the mantle without hesitation. He had spent too long warning of this moment to refuse when it arrived. The fleet assembled under his command was a shadow of the once mighty Dravik armada. Years of peace and complacency had left their forces undermanned and ill-prepared for a sustained conflict. Zeldhar knew he could not fight the humans on their terms. They were too unpredictable, too adaptable. Instead, he devised a strategy rooted in their own methods: precision, patience, and deception. He pored over reports of human movements, identifying patterns in their strikes. While the council debated how to defend their remaining assets, Zeldhar focused on finding the mind behind the chaos. He knew there was a central command, a locus from which the humans coordinated their attacks. If he could strike there, he might turn the tide. When the opportunity came, it was almost too perfect. A human carrier vessel, heavily guarded but isolated, was detected near the galactic rim. It was a tempting target, and Zeldhar knew it had to be bait. But bait could serve both predator and prey. He ordered his fleet to approach under the cover of a nearby nebula, masking their presence until the last possible moment. The battle was swift and brutal. The humans fought with a tenacity that bordered on reckless, but Zeldhar's forces held their ground. When the carrier finally fell, it was not the victory he had hoped for, but a grim confirmation of his fears. The data recovered from the wreckage revealed the scope of the human strategy: dozens of coordinated attacks, each time to exploit a specific weakness. And worse, the humans had already infiltrated Dravik systems far deeper than anyone had anticipated. As his fleet limped back to the nearest stronghold, Zeldhar sat alone in the command chamber of his flagship. The battle had cost them dearly, and the weight of every lost life pressed heavily on his soul. He reviewed the recovered data again and again, searching for something, anything that might give them an edge. But the more he read, the more he realized the true scope of the conflict. This was not just a war for survival. It was a war for the future, for the very soul of the Dravik people. The faint chime of an incoming transmission pulled him from his thoughts. It was Yevrakar, her face drawn and weary. "We've received word of additional strikes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's worse than we feared. Zeldar leaned back in his chair, his mechanical arm twitching faintly. It always is. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy with unspoken truths, with regrets too vast to voice. Finally, Yevrakar met his gaze, her golden eyes filled with something that might have been respect or sorrow. What do we do now, War Master? Zeldar's claws tapped against the armrest, each strike a quiet echo of his thoughts. We survive, and we make them regret underestimating us. The transmission ended, leaving him alone once more. Outside, the void stretched endlessly, a battlefield that cared nothing for pride or pain. Zeldar stared into its depths, his resolve hardening. The humans had shown their hand. Now it was time to show them what the Dravik could do. The sound of the war room was a low hum of controlled chaos. Voices murmuring over communication lines, data feeds flickering on expansive hollow displays, and the occasional barked order cutting through the tension like a blade. Zeldar stood at the center of it all, his crimson eyes locked on the swirling holographic representation of the sector. Every marker on the display told a story of destruction. Supply lines severed, outposts obliterated, civilian casualties mounting. It was the language of war, one he knew intimately, but it carried an ominous undertone he couldn't ignore. The humans weren't just fighting to win. They were dismantling everything the Dravik had built. War Master, a young officer called from across the room, his scaled hands trembling as he held out a data slate. New reports from the outer colonies. They've taken Vurak 7. Zeldar accepted the slate, his mechanical arm whirring softly as he adjusted his grip. The report confirmed his fears. Vurak 7 was a key agricultural hub, critical to sustaining their forces and civilian populations alike. Its loss would ripple through the Dravik infrastructure, compounding their vulnerabilities. They didn't hold it, Zeldar said aloud, his voice cutting through the murmurs in the room. They destroyed the orbital farms and left the planet to rot. No resources, no spoils, just ruin. The room fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the assembled officers. The humans weren't just conquering, they were ensuring that what they couldn't use, no one else could. Zeldar felt a flicker of admiration for the cold efficiency of the strategy, even as it deepened his resolve to stop them. "What are your orders, War Master?" one of the senior commanders asked, his voice steady despite the tension in his golden eyes. Zeldar stared at the map for a long moment, tracing the lines of conflict with his gaze. The humans were unpredictable, their tactics a blend of calculated precision and audacious risks. Meeting them head-on would be suicide, but retreating further was not an option. He needed to find a way to disrupt their momentum, to turn their own methods against them. "Send scouts to the ruins of Vurak 7, he said finally. "I want a full analysis of how they struck and what they left behind. If we can predict their next move, we may have a chance to counter it." The commanders nodded and dispersed, their disciplined movements a stark contrast to the turmoil brewing in Zeldar's mind. He remained by the display, his claws tapping rhythmically against the edge of the console. The humans had outmaneuvered them at every turn, and it was becoming clear that this was not the result of luck or improvisation. Someone on their side was orchestrating this campaign with a clarity of purpose that unnerved him. Later that night, Zeldar found himself in the dim confines of his private quarters, the silence a sharp contrast to the noise of the war room. He stared at a data pad displaying intercepted human transmissions, fragments of coded messages that painted a picture he could only partially see. The humans' leader, Elias Vren, was proving as enigmatic as the tactics he commanded. Every intercepted message bore his calculated touch, every move a reflection of his uncanny ability to exploit the Dravik's weaknesses. Zeldar leaned back in his chair, the servos in his arm clicking faintly as he adjusted his posture. His memories drifted to the first time he had encountered humans, decades ago during the border wars. They had been brash then, bold and reckless but disorganized. He had underestimated them once, and it had cost him dearly. Now, the tables had turned. They had learned from their defeats, adapted in ways the Dravik had not. A faint chime from his comm terminal broke his reverie. He activated the display, and Yevrakar's face appeared, her expression a mix of weariness and determination. "We've received word from the scouts," she said without preamble. "They found something at View Rack 7, a pattern in the debris fields. It suggests the humans are using a new kind of weapon, something designed to neutralize planetary defenses before their main force arrives." Zeldar's eyes narrowed. "Have they identified the source?" "Not yet," she admitted. "But there's more." One of the scouts uncovered an encoded signal buried in the wreckage. It's human in origin, but it appears to be a personal communique. It was addressed to someone named Zeldar. The words hit him like a physical blow. "What?" Yevrakar's expression softened, tinged with uncertainty. "We haven't decoded it yet, but it's genuine. Whoever sent it wanted to ensure you received it." The transmission ended, leaving Zeldar staring at the blank screen. 1,000 questions raced through his mind, but one thought rose above the chaos. The humans were sending him a message, and he needed to know why. When the decoded message finally arrived, it was in a voice he didn't recognize, but instantly distrusted. The humans spoke with calm precision, their words laced with an eerie familiarity. "War Master Zeldar," the voice began, its tone both respectful and mocking. "You don't know me, but I know you. I've studied your battles, your strategies, your victories. You're an impressive foe, but you're fighting a war that has already been won. I extend this message not as an adversary, but as a warning. Surrender now, and spare your people the inevitable." Zeldar listened to the message twice before deleting it, his claws trembling with a mixture of rage and defiance. The audacity of the humans to send such a taunt, to speak as though their victory was assured, only fueled his determination. They thought they had him cornered, but they had underestimated the depths of his resolve. He returned to the war room, his mind sharper than it had been in weeks. The humans had revealed their confidence, their belief in their own invincibility. It was a weakness, and Zeldar intended to exploit it. With a renewed sense of purpose, he addressed his officers. "The humans believe they've won. Let them. We will use their arrogance against them, strike where they least expect. This is not over. Not by a long shot." The officers saluted, their expressions hardened by his resolve. As the room came alive with activity, Zeldar allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The humans had declared their intent, but they had also underestimated their opponent. And that would be their downfall. The void shimmered with the eerie glow of distant stars as the Dravik fleet hung in a loose formation, their engines humming faintly against the oppressive silence of space. Zeldar stood on the bridge of his flagship, his crimson eyes fixed on the tactical display. Each marker on the hologram represented a piece of his gamble, a plan that hinged on precision, deception, and the element of surprise. The humans had shown themselves to be masters of calculated aggression, but Zeldar had learned from their tactics. Now he would turn their strategies against them. "Are the decoy vessels in position?" Zeldar asked, his voice sharp and commanding. "Yes, War Master," replied Lieutenant Varric, his scaled hands moving deftly over the controls. "The decoys have activated their cloaking fields and are broadcasting false energy signatures. The humans will think they've stumbled upon our main fleet." Zeldar nodded, satisfaction flickering briefly across his features. It was a dangerous ploy, but he had no other choice. The humans had spread his forces thin, forcing him into a war of attrition he couldn't win. To counter them, he needed to draw their attention away from his true objective, the infiltration of their central command ship. The command deck was tense but disciplined, the officers around him operating with the efficiency born of necessity. Each knew the stakes. If the humans deciphered their intentions too soon, the mission would collapse, and the Dravik's last hope of turning the tide would vanish. "War Master," Yevrakar's voice crackled through the comms, her tone laced with urgency. "We've detected a human patrol fleet moving toward the decoy line. They've taken the bait." Zeldar's claws tapped against the armrest of his chair, his mind racing through the possibilities. "Good. Keep them engaged, but don't overcommit. We need them to believe they've cornered us." "Yes, War Master," Yevrakar replied before the transmission ended. The decoy fleet's position was a deliberate illusion, designed to mimic the appearance of a desperate Dravik defense. The humans, confident in their superiority, would see it as an opportunity to crush what they believed to be the last remnants of resistance. What they wouldn't see was the strike team slipping through their lines, cloaked in the shadow of their own arrogance. Zeldar's mechanical arm flexed unconsciously as he turned to Captain Lytra, a seasoned officer who had fought alongside him for decades. "Is the infiltration team ready?" Lytra nodded, her golden eyes steady. "They've been briefed and are en route to the target. If all goes as planned, they'll breach the human flagship within the hour. And if it doesn't?" Zeldar asked, his tone calm, but his gaze piercing. "Then we'll make sure their sacrifice isn't in vain," Lytra replied without hesitation. The War Master studied her for a moment, a flicker of respect crossing his expression. Lytra was one of the few who truly understood the stakes, who shared his willingness to make hard decisions for the survival of their people. The minutes stretched into an eternity as the operation unfolded. Reports from the decoy fleet painted a picture of escalating conflict, the humans pressing their advantage with characteristic ruthlessness. Zeldar monitored the battle with detached focus, his attention divided between the larger conflict and the silent movements of the infiltration team. Then, at last, the signal came, a single pulse of encrypted data that confirmed the team's success. They had breached the human flagship, the heart of their operations. Now came the hard part, dismantling the command structure from within. "Activate the disruption field," Zeldar ordered, his voice cutting through the tension on the bridge. "We can't let them call for reinforcements." A ripple of energy spread from the Dravik flagship, a carefully calibrated pulse designed to interfere with the humans' communications and navigation systems. It wouldn't hold for long, but it would buy the infiltration team the time they needed. As the seconds ticked by, Zeldar's thoughts turned to the humans' leader, Elias Vren. The name had become a specter haunting his every move, the architect of the strategy that had brought the Dravik to the brink of collapse. Vren's tactics were unlike anything Zeldar had faced before, blending audacity with surgical precision. It was as though the human commander knew exactly how the Dravik thought, how they would respond. A sudden burst of static interrupted his thoughts, followed by the strained voice of one of the infiltration team members. "This is Unit Delta. We've secured the data core, but we're pinned down near the command center. Resistance is heavier than expected." Zeldar clenched his jaw, his mechanical fingers digging into the armrest. "Hold your position. Reinforcements are on standby if necessary." "We don't have time for reinforcements," the voice replied, a note of desperation creeping in. "We need to neutralize Vren now, or this entire operation is for nothing." Before Zeldar could respond, the line went dead. He stared at the silent comm unit, a mix of frustration and admiration churning in his chest. The humans were fighting with the ferocity of a cornered beast, refusing to yield even in the face of overwhelming odds. "Prepare a contingency plan," Zeldar ordered, his voice colder than the void outside. "If the infiltration team fails, we need to ensure the flagship doesn't escape." Lytra hesitated, her expression betraying a rare moment of doubt. "War Master, that could mean sacrificing our own?" "I know," Zeldar said quietly, his gaze unwavering. "But if we don't stop them here, there won't be anyone left to save." The tension on the bridge was palpable as the minutes dragged on. Each passing second felt like an eternity, the weight of the mission pressing down on everyone. Then, without warning, the tactical display shifted. The human flagship's energy signature began to waver, its power systems flickering erratically. "They've done it," Varric said, his voice filled with cautious hope. "The flagship is destabilizing." Zeldar allowed himself a brief exhale of relief. The humans had underestimated the Dravik's resolve, their belief in their own superiority blinding them to the possibility of defeat. But the War Master knew better than to celebrate prematurely. "Prepare for extraction," he ordered, "and signal the fleet to regroup. This war isn't over yet." As the Dravik forces moved to consolidate their victory, Zeldar stood at the center of the chaos, his mind already racing ahead to the battles yet to come. The humans had shown their strength, but they had also revealed their vulnerabilities. And Zeldar would ensure they paid for every step they had taken in a Dravik space. The war had reached a turning point, but the path ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty. For now, Zeldar focused on the only certainty that mattered: survival, at any cost. The quiet of the aftermath was deceptive, a fragile silence that could shatter at the slightest disturbance. Zeldar stood on the observation deck of his flagship, his crimson eyes fixed on the field of debris drifting in the void. The shattered remains of the human fleet marked a hard-won victory, but it was a victory steeped in bitter truths. The war was far from over, and the cost of this small triumph weighed heavily on his shoulders. Behind him, the soft hiss of the doors announced Yevrakar's arrival. She moved with the careful precision of someone who understood the gravity of the moment, her golden eyes flicking toward the debris field before settling on Zeldar. The infiltration team's final transmission came through, she said quietly, holding out a data pad. They succeeded in neutralizing the human flagship's core, but there were no survivors. Zeldar accepted the data pad without a word, his mechanical arm clicking softly as he adjusted his grip. He read the report, his expression unreadable, but Yevrakar could see the tension in his posture, the way his claws flexed ever so slightly. They knew the risks, Zeldar said at last, his voice a low rumble. And they gave us this chance. We honor their sacrifice by ensuring it wasn't in vain. Yevrakar nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on him. The humans will regroup. This victory has bought us time, but not much. Their leader, Vren, wasn't aboard the flagship. He'll retaliate. Zeldar turned to face her, his expression sharp and resolute. Then we'll be ready. Vren's tactics rely on exploiting our weaknesses, but now we've seen how he thinks. He expects us to react defensively, to retreat. Instead, we'll strike first. He stepped past her, his cloak trailing behind him as he moved toward the tactical display. The hollow map shimmered to life, showing the shifting lines of conflict across the sector. Each marker represented a choice, a decision that could mean survival or annihilation. Send word to the fleet, Zeldar continued. We consolidate our forces and launch a counteroffensive. No more waiting for the humans to dictate the terms of engagement. If Vren wants to see how far we'll go to defend our people, we'll show him. Yevrakar hesitated, her brow furrowing. And what of the civilians, War Master? The outer colonies are vulnerable. If we commit to this offensive, we risk leaving them exposed. Zeldar's gaze hardened. He knew the weight of her words, the impossible balance between protecting the innocent and striking back at their oppressors. The humans had forced them into a corner, and every decision carried consequences he could not ignore. We'll leave a defensive detachment at the most critical colonies, he said after a moment. But the best way to protect our people is to end this war. The longer we delay, the more lives we lose. Yevrakar studied him for a moment, then nodded. I'll see it done. As she left, Zeldar returned his focus to the hollow map, his thoughts racing. The humans had pushed them to the brink, but in doing so, they had also exposed their own vulnerabilities. Vren's overconfidence was both his greatest strength and his most glaring weakness. If Zeldar could exploit it, he might turn the tide of the war. Hours later, as the fleet prepared to move, Zeldar found himself alone once more. The weight of command pressed heavily on him, each decision a burden he carried for the sake of his people. He thought of the infiltration team, of their courage and sacrifice. He thought of the countless lives lost in this relentless conflict. And he thought of Vren, the shadowy figure who had orchestrated so much destruction. The calm terminal chimed, breaking his reverie. He activated the display, and an unexpected figure appeared, Elias Vren. The human commander's face was calm, his expression one of quiet confidence. His image was a reminder of the enemy's cunning, the sharp intellect that had driven the Dravik to the edge. War Master Zeldar, Vren said, his voice smooth and measured. Congratulations on your victory. You've proven yourself a formidable opponent, as I knew you would. Zeldar's claws flexed involuntarily, but he kept his voice steady. Spare me your platitudes, Vren. If this is another attempt to intimidate me, you're wasting your time. Vren chuckled softly. Intimidation? No, War Master. I merely wanted to speak with you before the next act of this war begins. You and I both know where this is headed. More blood, more destruction. For what? To satisfy the pride of our leaders? To cling to the illusion of victory? Zeldhar's eyes narrowed. You speak as if you care about the lives you've taken. Your actions suggest otherwise. Vren's expression darkened, a flicker of something unspoken crossing his features. You misunderstand me. I care about the outcome. I care about ensuring that my people have a future, just as you do. The difference is, I'm willing to do what's necessary to secure it. And that justifies the slaughter of innocents? Zeldhar retorted, his voice sharp with anger. Your tactics are not those of a soldier. They're those of a butcher. Vren met his gaze, unflinching. Call it what you will, War Master. But know this. I will not stop until this war ends, one way or another. If you're as wise as I believe you to be, you'll see the futility of further resistance. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Zeldhar staring at the empty screen. Vren's words lingered, a poison that seeped into his thoughts. He understood the human's perspective, even if he loathed it. They were both fighting for survival, both willing to cross lines that others wouldn't. It was a grim symmetry that only deepened Zeldhar's resolve. He turned back to the tactical display, his gaze hardening. The humans had underestimated the Dravik before, and they would do so again. Vren might believe the war was inevitable, but Zeldhar would prove him wrong. There was a path to victory, no matter how narrow, and he would find it. The fleet began its advance, the ships moving in silent unison through the void. Zeldhar stood at the heart of it all, a lone figure against the vastness of space. The war was far from over, but he carried with him the hopes of his people, the unyielding determination to see them through the darkness. And as the stars stretched before him, he whispered a silent promise. This was not the end,